Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today at our Lunch and Learn. We get to hear what Mary's Place is doing alongside our amazing partners that are here with us today to minimize the impacts of homelessness on children and what our community can do to help. I see a lot of old friends, new friends, so thank you for joining us. We are so grateful. We'll get started in a few minutes, so we'll hang on tight here for a couple minutes. But I just want to let you know, if you have any questions you'd like to send in advance at any point today along the way, you can enter those in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to answer those. So any point today, if you hear a speaker that you really want to ask a question to, please enter your questions in as we go. We'll try to get to all of them, but we're just so grateful to see you here today and that you want to learn more about how homelessness and this eviction moratorium is impacting our youth. We have some amazing partners joining us. So we'll get started here in a couple minutes, but we're glad you're here. Thanks for joining, everyone. It's great to see so many new friends. We are grateful, grateful, grateful. We'll get started in a few minutes. If you have any questions ahead of time here, please put them down. Use the tab at the bottom of your screen for Q&A, and we'll answer those questions as we get to them today. We're so excited about being able to do this with our partners that are here with us today. We really want to help talk to you about how we can minimize the impacts of homelessness on children and what you can do to help. Some people are still joining. Thank you, thank you. So grateful. Looks like Mary Dunbar from Kids Plus has joined us too. So great to see you, Mary. I think we'll get started in 1 minute, just a few more folks to join. Can you tell we're excited about this one? All right, we are excited. We're just going to get started because we have so much to cover. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Marty Hartman, the director of Mary's Place, and I'm joined by some incredible panelists today that I'll share that we'll introduce to you in a moment. But thanks for joining us today at our Lunch and Learn webinar. You can find the recordings of our past Lunch and Learn webinars on our website, and Katrina is going to put that link in the chat for you. We've had some amazing, great topics, but today we are laser focused on talking about youth and family homelessness, and the state and local eviction moratoriums have expired. I know, as many of you know, and thousands of families in our community are facing eviction. And that means an estimated 124,400 households, 13% of renters are behind in their rent, many of them with children. And the economic effects of this pandemic continue to place incredible financial, mental, physical tolls on our women and families in our community. And that means particularly our Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have been disproportionately impacted due to the ongoing impacts of systemic racism. And we know that experiencing homelessness has lasting traumatic effects for these families and especially of our children. So at today's Lunch and Learn, we'll talk about the impact that homelessness has on children, what the impact that has on their early learning and development, and their likelihood of future homelessness. Our staff and community partners who are joining us today will share what's being done to minimize those impacts, to stop the cycle of homelessness, and give our children opportunities for better futures. Before I introduce our panel, though, and get started, I'd like to begin our time together today by acknowledging the land on which Mary's Place operates as the traditional home of the Coast Salish people, specifically the traditional home of the Duwamish, the Snohomish, and the Suquamish, who are, although not all recognized by the federal government, still here today. We offer gratitude to elders and all other Coast Salish peoples, past and present and future, who have made it possible for us to live and work in this community, and invite each of us to seek authentic relationships with Indigenous communities and continue to learn about the past and present colonial impacts, and especially to move beyond an acknowledgement to action. Thank you. I'm going to share a little bit about Mary's Place. You know, we began more than 20 years ago as a day center for women experiencing homelessness in downtown Seattle. And our drop-in Women's Day Center is still the heart of Mary's Place at 9th and Stewart. We serve anywhere up to about 100 women a day, providing basic necessities, right? Along with nourishing meals and resources for housing, employment, and wellness. It has really been the heartbeat and a foundation of how we started Mary's Place. But during the recession in 2008, we really started seeing moms with children coming through our doors at a rapid rate, and we had no resources to offer. There was no shelter capacity. There was no funding for families experiencing homelessness. We didn't know what we were doing with running overnight shelter, but we knew we had to do something. We could not be bystanders. We could not turn these families away. And we opened our first overnight shelter for women and children in 2011 and have continued to develop our programming to address the growing needs in our community. And not long after that first shelter opened, we knew we needed to keep families together to address their housing needs. And we opened a shelter that welcomed dads. And then we opened one that welcomed extended families and families with pets and families who had lost everything caring for a sick child. That was the beginning of our Popsicle Place program. And before COVID, we provided emergency shelter and meals together with resources for housing, employment, and wellness for 800 moms, dads, and kids every night spread across King County. And Mary's Place runs the King County Emergency Family Shelter Intake Line, where families call each day and each night for shelter and hope. Before this pandemic, we were so close. We were so close to reaching our goal that no child sleeps outside. But the pandemic forced us to close 4 smaller shelters to keep our guests and staff safe. But we're excited to announce that we've just opened our newest shelter in a former hotel in Bellevue. So this life-saving building serves 200 family members each night, but it's still not enough. We're seeing a record number of phone calls to our intake line and are only able to offer shelter to less than half of the families that call in each night for shelter. There just is not enough room. And for those who can't come into shelter, we have our mobile outreach team working with families in cars and tents to connect them to resources and to use our rapid response fund to really address those barriers and move them back into housing quickly. We've discussed some of those programs like housing and mobile outreach and past lunch and learns, and we really want to invite you to watch those webinars because they're available on our website to learn more. But today, we're focusing on the impacts of homelessness on youth, ways we can minimize that trauma for children when they experience families losing their housing, and the importance of keeping children and their families in their homes. So let me address, I want to introduce our amazing panel today. I'm going to start with Marta, who is the Mary's Place Youth Services Director. She oversees the youth services program across all our shelters, connecting our children with teens and schools and age-appropriate activities and outings and resources to help minimize trauma and ensure they do not fall behind in their learning and development. Next is the amazing Antonio. Antonio is the McKinney-Vento and foster care liaison of Highline Public Schools. Antonio works to identify and connect students experiencing homelessness to resources and support, ensuring that each one of them have access to transportation, meals, supplies, and social services and other needs. And then we have Zivit, who is the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn Program Manager at Child Care Resources. And she manages the families, friends, and neighbor programs to improve the quality of early learning and childhood care. So we are so thankful that they have joined us. And we, Dominique Alex is our Mary's Place Chief Program Officer, who will be joining us and oversees shelter and program services for families experiencing homelessness in our community, which includes the youth services, health services, prevention services, outreach, and housing support. So I'm so grateful that you are all here today, and we want to just dive right in and get started. So let's get started with Antonio. How does that sound? Antonio, your work with the McKinney-Vento program, specifically through Highline schools, has been instrumental in helping identify and support students who may be living unsheltered or in uninhabitable conditions. Can you share what McKinney-Vento program is, some of the services you provide, and maybe what you're seeing in the youth population that you work with?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Marty, for the great introduction. As Marty mentioned, my name is Antonio Lewis, and I'm the McKinney-Vento and Foster Care Liaison for Highline Public Schools. I'm currently in my 12th year in the school district, serving students and families who are unstably housed. And so just quickly, the McKinney-Vento program is a federal program that has been around since 1987. So for over 30 years, and the primary goal of the McKinney-Vento program is to provide educational stability for children and youth who are unstably housed. And so the way in which we do that here in Highline, and I think across other districts, vary in terms of that educational stability. So it could be providing transportation so that students can stay in their school of origin, even if they move outside of the school district. It could be providing breakfast and lunch to make sure students are fed, assistance with any school fees, so PE uniforms, school uniforms, cap and gowns, ASB, if they're doing athletics, any other before and after school programs, we can adjust their transportation so that they can participate in those programs. As far as trends, I would say probably within the last several years, what we've seen is as families have been priced out of Seattle, they slowly started to migrate to Highline. And then within the last 3 to 4 years, we've been seeing families move further and further south in the hopes of finding affordable housing. And so I always like to say affordability is relative. What's affordable for one family may not be for the next. And so we've just seen a huge explosion within the Highline district of rental costs, which are happening all across the state and all across the country. And many of our families tend to be larger. And so when the pandemic hit, many either had their hours cut or lost their jobs, which unfortunately resulted in more students falling into, and families falling into situations where they qualified for McKinney-Vento services. The slide that you're currently seeing, the over 4 million statistic, specifically speaks to unaccompanied homeless youth, which are students, we define them as 14 to 21, but in terms of the national numbers, 14 to 24. And so as more and more families find themselves in situations where they're unable to afford a place, we're seeing the numbers continue to increase. And so here you see, again, this slide is really speaking specifically to high school students. And so this was from Schoolhouse Connection, who's a great partner with many districts across the country from the 18-19 school year. And as you can see here, it says for every 18.5 high school students, one has experienced homelessness. So just think about that for a second. Out of 18.5 students, one has experienced homelessness during their high school period from 9th to 12th grade. Next slide, please. And so here is another slide and data point from Schoolhouse Connections, which looks at the racial and ethnicity breakdown and disproportionate numbers of homelessness, as Marty described in our opening. As you can see, Black or African-American high school students are 2.25 times more likely to qualify as McKinney-Vento and be unstably housed as compared to their whiter Caucasian high school peers. Hispanic or Latino or Latinx students 2 times, our American Indian and Alaskan Native 1.7, our LGBTQI students 2.2, and then extremely high for the students who identify as transgender, 9.22 times more likely to experience homelessness. Next slide, please. And so here are some of the educational impacts of homelessness, which Marty addressed briefly in her opening. As you can see, 42% of students who experience homelessness say they dropped out of school at least once. So these are students who had a lot going on, who tend to be unaccompanied, so they're not living in the home of a parent or guardian. Most are couch surfing. So from week to week or month to month, they're all over King County or Pierce County or Snohomish County in some school years. And so it's really difficult for them to get to and from school when you don't know where you're going to be from week to week. And so many drop out. 60% said it's very hard to stay in school, when you don't know where you're going to be or when you're going to have your next meal beyond school. And so you have a lot of stressors added to these students. And so it does contribute to the dropout rate. And as you can see, 87% likelihood of dropping out of school or having chronic absenteeism and disproportionate school discipline. And then I think really at the heart of the matter, as much as we want to provide educational stability, over time, the achievement gaps for these students continue to widen when they're unable to get to school or they don't know where they're going to be. And I think when the pandemic hit and districts all across the country went to remote only, that disproportionately impacted our students who qualify for McKinney-Vento services. Often these families were doubled up or tripled up. Despite providing Chromebooks and iPads and hotspots, many were in locations where the internet was just not strong enough. And so you can have all the devices and everything and programs, but if you're residing in an area where you don't have strong internet and in-person school wasn't an option for that time, then guess what? Kids fall further behind, they can't participate, and the gap continues to widen. Next slide, please. Here is so Highline public school specific data from the last few school years. And so at the top of the page, you see the total number. So these are the total number of students that were qualified or requalified for the McKinney-Vento program during that specific school year. One caveat with these numbers is that not all of the students that are represented in the data remained in Highline for the entire school year, but for data purposes, the state requests or requires districts to count them. And so some of these students and families may have started the year in Highline, but they could have then moved to Seattle or to Bellevue or to Tacoma. Often what we see is families usually move within 4 to 5 times during a school year. And then on the bottom, it just has a breakdown in terms of the age group or cohort, if you will. So as you can see, you have preschool, you have elementary, middle school, and high school. And those are the numbers for each of those cohorts from the past few school years. Next slide, please. And here's just, more information and how to help. My number and contact information is there. The district page for Highline Public Schools is also listed. And then we also have our wonderful Highline Schools Foundation. They've been a tremendous partner for our students and families who are unstably housed in providing gift cards for clothing, for food, for gas. And we're seeing a huge increase since the pandemic hit of more families out of work, or food insecurity for students, especially if you have 3 teenagers, in your home. Teenagers tend to eat. And so more and more families are finding themselves having to rely on food banks and faith-based organizations, community organizations for social service support. And so that's kind of where we are right now as far as McKinney-Vento and the program. And if you have questions, I believe you can put those in the chat. You can also reach out to me via email or phone, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or provide any information that you need. And if I don't have it, I'll follow up with someone who does and then get that to you. Thanks again, everyone, for allowing me to speak to you today.
Antonio, we can't thank you enough for your hard work, your perseverance, your support of all of our children that are experiencing homelessness in the Highline School District and other areas. You have done amazing work, and I'm sure many of you are shocked and surprised at the numbers that you saw today. So if you have questions for Antonio, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, because we want to make sure to answer those for you. So thank you so much. I see that Dominique Alex has joined us. She's going to come on camera, which I think is awesome, our Chief Program Officer. So she'll be presenting in a little bit, but we want to get right to Zivit and say just thank you so much for your hard work at Child Care Resources and all that you do for families and children in the community. And we're excited really about our continued partnership at the Allen Family Center to support children who are housing insecure. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Allen Family Center in the Mount Baker neighborhood, it's really a one-stop service hub for families in King County, and particularly those that are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And at the Allen Family Center, families can access services, resources, technology, supplies like diapers, food, warm coats, and blankets. And Zivit, can you introduce yourself and share really about your important work at Child Care Resources and share about the important work you're doing to help support families with child development and early learning?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Marty, for the introduction. My name is Zivit, Shechter Nissim, and I am the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn Program Manager with Child Care Resources. So among the programs that Child Care Resources is offering to families and child care providers, Child Care Resources, or CCR, operates as the state referral center for childcare of Washington that helps families find and pay for childcare that fits their needs and deliver wider services to families who are experiencing housing instability. A few numbers from Washington State, pre-COVID numbers. In Washington State, more than 30,000 children under the age of 6 are experiencing homelessness, and 40% of children living in homeless shelters are under the age of 4. We see that many of the families who turn to us are families of color, low income, single parents, and women who experience domestic violence and are now experiencing housing instability. I would say that in general, children experiencing homelessness often live in an unpredictable, chaotic circumstances with disruptions in their physical environment and interpersonal relationships that affect their emotional, cognitive, and behavioral development. We know from the research that childhood homelessness and associated traumas that comes with it, it has a profound and accumulative negative effect on development of children that leads many to repeat the cycle of homelessness as adults. But we know, on the other hand, from research that stability and nurturing caregiver, a safe environment, and quality trauma-informed early learning can provide an anchor of security for both children and their families, and could protect children in those situations. We know that many families are struggling right now with finding childcare subsidies and finding care in the current market and finding providers who accept childcare subsidies. But for families who experience homelessness, it's even more challenging. For example, they need childcare in non-traditional hours. They need to access reliable transportation. They have issues with maintaining attendance, finding childcare equipped to care for children with special needs, and rapidly finding new childcare when the work or the living situation changes. Katrina, if we can show the first slide, that would be helpful. Just for those of you who are not familiar with the definition of homelessness, McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, an individual who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And there are a few examples because it's a very wide definition. So I just put a few examples here that falls under this definition. For example, sharing the housing of other persons like family or friends due to loss of housing, living in hotels, motels, trailer parks, etc., living in emergency or transitional shelters, sleeping in primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place that is not designated for use of regular sleeping accommodation, and living in car parks, public spaces, etc. We'll move to the next one. So I wanted to bring a few voices of a family that is experiencing housing instability. This specific mother has a young child and she is currently living in a shelter. And we asked her why does she believe that it's important to connect children with early learning, children who are experiencing homelessness with early learning opportunities.
Mm-hmm. She was always looking forward to, going to daycare, and anytime she see her, oh, she'll be so happy. And when it is time for drop off, she'll be crying. I remember at the shelter, oh, I cried. She didn't want to go back into the shelter. She was clinging to the woman, the daycare lady, and she didn't want to get out of her car seat, out of the, the SUV. She was just in there. And I cried that day because she knew what she was actually going to see again, the same people, crowd, screaming everywhere, So she didn't want to. She preferred staying at daycare. Yeah. So
just a small window to what those families are experiencing and how childcare, a reliable childcare can change their experience. So what we do in childcare resources, when families are calling this statewide referral center, we provide comprehensive, low barrier intake and enrollment process. We try to minimize the documentation that we need. They don't need external referral and limited information sharing. And we try to do the whole process of eligibility determination very quick. We can offer short-term childcare subsidy that childcare resources is providing from private funding. It's short-term, it's 3 to 6 months until they are approved to longer-term solutions for subsidies. We offer early learning service and resource coordination, like bus ticket, diapers, referrals to early intervention if there is any concerns around child development or other concerns, and other community programs. Pre-pandemic, we used to do it face-to-face. Our team would go and meet with the families and provide the services and materials that we had. Right now, it is still being done remotely, unfortunately. Identity childcare needs and options. We do a one-on-one conversations with families to identify their childcare needs. It could be, we take under consideration the location, family safety, culturally relevant childcare, family home care or versus center, of course, transportation and continuity of care. We also connect those families with long-term solutions and supports. As I mentioned, the subsidy, the long-term subsidies are the working connections and the homeless grace period that was just extended to 12 months. And does not require the families or parents to work or go to school while they get the subsidy, and there's no copay. And other programs that we offer are ECAP, Head Start, Early Head Start, and others. I can go to the next slide. So as Marty mentioned, the Allen Family Center is another way for us to reach families in need in the community. I just want to mention that the Allen Family Center is a unique partnership between the Paul Allen Foundation, City of Seattle, Mary's Place, Mercy Housing Northwest, and Child Care Resources. And as Marty mentioned, it's a one-stop service hub for King County families participating, particularly those experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So Child Care Resources have a full-time family engagement specialist at the Allen Family Center that provide assistance with childcare and relevant subsidies. And we also have 3 programs for family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. We have the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn program, which are playgroups, facilitated playgroups for anyone who cares for younger children 0 to 5. We have the Brothers and Sisters program. This is a training program for youth who care for younger children on a regular basis. And we have the Early Learning Conversation program that also supports families with young children. This is the number of our family center, the referral center, statewide referral centers. You're welcome to call or pass this number if you know someone who needs our support. And this is my contact information. If you have any questions or want to know more, you're welcome to contact me. Thank you.
Wow, that is so much information, and we just want to say thank you, Zivit and Child Care Resources for your critical support and early learning, child care, child development. It has been really a critical component of Mary's Place. So all that you do, your partnership is deeply valued. So thank you so much. I'm excited to introduce y'all to Marta. Marta, really your work at Mary's Place as the Youth Services Director focuses on reducing trauma that children and teens experience while living in shelter. And really your work and the work of the Youth Services team is making sure they don't fall behind in at school or their early development. So we would love for you to share about some of the programs the Youth Services team manages for toddlers, children, and teens. So take it away, Marta.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Marty. My name is Marta Asfaw. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Youth Services Director here at Mary's Place. Sorry, like Zivit had mentioned, we acknowledge and recognize the trauma that shelter can have on kids. And so our team really works to meet the social and developmental needs of our youth through a trauma-informed lens. So we serve kids between the ages of 0 all the way till 18 years of age. And we break down our programming by age ranges because we also acknowledge that kids are at different stages of development and trauma may look different at different ages. So we have our TOTS Club program that's specifically for our 0 to 5. So kids who are not yet enrolled into preschool or are waitlisted to get into Head Start programs, making sure that we are providing on-site programming and being intentional, and also working with our families to get kids connected to developmental screenings, as we recognize that early intervention is key. And so working with community partners to complete those referrals and making sure that our families have access while they're here with us. Our Kids Club program tends to be 5 to 18, but as you can imagine, teenagers don't really want to hang out with younger kids. So it tends to be 5 to 12, so that kindergarten through middle school age. So making sure that we are providing enrichment programs and programming on site for our kids. So when kids come home from school, they have a place to come, they have a place to go, they have a snack, they have making sure that we're doing power half hour where we're engaging in homework activities, educational things, and making sure that we're speaking to STEM activities while our kids are here in shelter with us. And then we also acknowledge that outside space is important for our kids. And so when we have access to those playgrounds on site, it's really huge for us and for our kids to be able to get outside and play and run. And we also work with families to get kids connected to childcare through partnerships with like DCYF and making sure that our families know about the different subsidies that are available to them and working with those community partners. And, you know, if families don't qualify, we're working with childcare resources to get our families connected and make sure that they have that subsidy paid for, given that they are currently experiencing homelessness. And we also work closely with our behavioral and health team internally to make sure that we are getting our kids connected to behavioral mental health resources, recognizing that, you know, like we've all talked about and acknowledged the impact that shelter can have. And so when we see some of those behaviors manifesting in shelter, making sure that we're there to help support and get those kids connected. We have Teen Club for our teens, making sure that it's separate space. As you can imagine, our teens tend to take on some adult responsibilities sometimes. And so being in shelter can be a lot for them, especially when they're in spaces and small rooms with their younger siblings. And so being intentional about providing space that's independent from Kids Club, that is a teen club, or providing teen leadership opportunities and really listening to the teens, what they want to see in their programming, what they want to do, and providing accesses and working with our volunteer team to make sure we're bringing in things that are reflective of our youth and that we have those opportunities. I will say through COVID, we have noticed the impact specifically on all of our ages, but for our teens especially, the lack of being able to go to school, having that connection to their friends, to their teachers, to their counselors, and the impact that it had. And we all know that there's not enough subsidies for teens to get connected to after school programs. And so there is a lack there. So trying to figure out how we can mitigate that and work to get our teens connected. And, you know, knowing that subsidy ends at 12, what do we do for 13 to 18? Is something that we're working to address. And also we help get our kids connected to school enrollment and transportation with partners with McKinney-Vento, making sure that our team is connecting with families within 48 hours intake to shelter so that there is not too much of a lag time between entering shelter and getting connected to school. And while we wait for transportation to be set up, we are intentional about providing transportation so there's not a barrier for our families and making sure that we're providing Ubers and Lyfts so our kids can get to school and attend in school. We also do summer opportunities. So when summer comes, you know, we are open all day. We are taking our kids out into the community, making sure they're getting connected, providing access, exposing them to new things, sorry, I guess the chat distracted me. Making sure that we're exposing our kids to different things and leading field trips and really listening to the kids and the families of what they want to see and what they want to do and being intentional about that. That's my spiel.
You and your youth services team are awesome and amazing, and thank you for navigating all of these partnerships. You can tell, right? It takes a community, it takes a village to make sure that we're reaching every child and providing the resources that are needed. So thank you, Marta, for highlighting all of the work that your team does. And if you have questions for Marta, please type those in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And now we want to introduce you to Dominique. Dominique, really in your role as the Chief Program Officer at Mary's Place, you help address needs for families entering shelter and overcoming barriers to move forward into housing. You have a lot of programs you oversee. So can you talk about what some of those barriers are specifically for children and really the overall trauma that is experienced when children lose their homes?
Yes, thank you, Marty. I really want to take us back a little bit and think about the early years. You've heard a little bit of that from my colleagues on this call, but it's important for people to think about kids' brain development. And that 0 to 5 range, 90% of our brains are developed during that time. And so if you think about it, a lot of that time is really nurtured by the environmental conditions and the people that are within those. And so what happens is when children are forced to experience homelessness and poverty and trauma, it can create toxic stress and also adverse childhood experiences. And so if they have to come into shelter, you've heard about these resources that are available. But I want to take a step back because if we can avoid kids from coming into shelter or living in their cars and tents, we can do even more as we think about trying to get ahead of that curve. And part of the way that we do that here at Mary's Place is through our prevention dollars, our rental assistance program. And so Katrina is going to put up some slides so we can talk a little bit about our prevention dollars that we received this year, and some of where we find is some of our greatest investment in trying to help children reduce the trauma and stop those cycles of homelessness and poverty in their family. So in this slide, as you can see, this is some of the money that we received from King County Rental Assistance. This is the bigger picture of the money that was allocated across multiple partners. So that $243 million investment in different iterations has been distributed to help families stay in their hard-won homes. Mary's Place was fortunate to be allocated $4.47 million of that. And if you look here, this chart can be a little confusing, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the big picture of that 46,713 people is how many people have applied for rental assistance in the big system of King County. Out of that, only 22,467 of those families or households have been served. It is coming to an end where that allocation of money is almost done being spent down. So by the end of the month, all the money that you see, that $243 million, will be depleted. It will be spent out to all of the families that have applied. There is a humongous gap. Almost half of those families will not be served, and it has been estimated at least 10,000, if not more, will not be served with any of these dollars. Through the moratorium, we have seen really increased numbers in our shelter, families not being able to stay in our homes. But if you go to the next slide, Katrina, because of this funding, we have been able to help 341 families stay in their hard-won homes and avoid being evicted, avoid the trauma of coming into shelter and experiencing homelessness. We know that that is not enough. As I talked about, there will be 10,000 families or households not served by these dollars. And so we know that this investment helps us reduce that experience of homelessness and poverty and trauma and disrupting that development of children. And the long-term effects for that disruption or that experience of homelessness really has long-term effects of children's executive functioning, their social emotional processing and regulation, learning loss, as you've heard about. We can prevent that. And part of the way to prevent it is to invest in helping families stay in their hard-won homes. So thank you so much. And I also want to say that we don't do this by ourselves. We do this with our partners. So you saw some of our partners we've been working with, because we know that by partnering with others, we can reach the bigger picture and helping families stay in their hard-won homes. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dominique, for giving us that overview of where we are, really the state of our county at this moment in time. And it is critical that we continue to work to bridge that gap to keep more families in their homes. So thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to all our panelists. You are awesome and amazing, and you've given us so much to think about. And we want to make sure that we answer all the questions that are coming in from the audience. So we are ready to do that. If you have any other questions for Dominique, use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So Katrina, can you read the first question?
Yes, so far we have a few questions that have come in. First, Antonio, if I could direct this one to you. Why do you think the recorded numbers of students experiencing homelessness are declining in the Highline district?
I think a couple of reasons. One, a lot of our families have decided to move to other areas, as I mentioned, kind of the trends. So when I first started in 2010, we were seeing a lot of families who could not afford a place in Seattle. And so Highline is a unique school district in that it covers multiple municipalities. So parts of White Center, parts of Des Moines, Burien, SeaTac. And so within the last, I would say 3 to 4 school years, while our numbers still remain high in terms of the state numbers, more families are migrating further south, and some are have actually left the state of Washington because it's just too expensive for them. And so we've seen a huge uptick in that as soon as COVID hit 2 years ago. So a lot of families who reluctantly had to leave, they just knew that they were not going to get out of that cycle of homelessness and housing instability here with their current situation. And so they decided to go to another state, or in some cases, families went back to the country in which they came from. So we've had a lot of our families going back to Mexico or Honduras or Guatemala and other places. So that kind of speaks to a little bit as far as our numbers are. I mean, they're high. Obviously, you saw the data, but there has been a dip in a few years. And part of that too is also with COVID, you know, being able to reach students and families when there's not in-person school and there's no transportation to provide, you know, at that time, it was very difficult because you didn't know where families were. Phone numbers, you know, weren't working, emails, home visits, et cetera. So those are just a few of the reasons why Highline specifically, our numbers are where they are. We're just seeing families, you know, move further and further south, Puyallup, Tacoma, et cetera, in the hopes of finding affordable housing. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Antonio. Next question, and I'm not sure who this may have initially been directed to, might have been Antonio, but I think anyone might be able to answer here. You mentioned that many of your families are larger families. How many members are in typical households?
I would say within the last few years, we're seeing about probably seven, in some cases 8 household members. And so of that, probably 4 or 3 or 4 are school-aged children. And so when I first started over a decade ago, we were seeing, you know, single mom or single dad and maybe a student or 2 students. And then within the last few years, especially with more families doubled up, or as I mentioned earlier, tripled up in some cases, you're starting to see aunt, uncle, grandparents as well, all in one household. And then, you know, this wasn't a part of the question, but what another aspect of that, tying it to COVID, is we had students, you know, in households where someone tested, you know, positive. So if you're a family that's in a shelter, if you're a family that's in a hotel, you know, you can't self-isolate. And so when we went to the hybrid learning model, we had students who were missing, you know, multiple weeks of school because it's just them and mom or just them and dad, and they don't have anywhere to go to isolate. But I'd say on average, probably about anywhere from 6 to 8 household members. And so many of those families want to remain together. And so some families are reluctant to go into shelter for the reasons that were mentioned today on this call. And so when that's the case, you know, it makes it that much more difficult, you know, for families who don't want to go into shelter, but they're not in a position to be able to afford their own forever home.
Thank you, Antonio. This next question may be for Zivit or Marta. Are people with children who are experiencing homelessness prioritized to receive childcare and safe housing? And where are we falling short to provide them with this support?
I can definitely say that we do prioritize those families, but we are also depending on slots, childcare slots that are available, the providers that are accepting subsidies. There's not as many as we wish there were. We also see all over the Washington state childcare deserts. where there are no childcare providers, and our team needs to be very, very innovative with this thinking of how to solve the problem of childcare for those families who live in those areas with no options.
And I would just add to that that there's also a lack of childcare, like Zivit had said, facilities. A lot of times our families prefer to have their kids enrolled into facilities versus in-home, given that there's a difference, there can be a difference in the services that are provided. And so sometimes our families have to be waitlisted for those. And there's also the homelessness grace period that is only for a year, that every year we're trying to get more, people are trying to get more money and more funding to get that approved and get some legislation to make sure that homeless families do have funding and that subsidy is covered for a year. But again, that's only, a homeless grace period is only for a year. And after the family has used up the year, then there's a challenge to get more funding, and we have to reach out to other providers to see if they can take on that expense.
Thank you both. Next question for Dominique. This is so sad that 50% will not receive assistance. This referring to those who are housed but behind in rent. Can families sponsor other families to help prevent homelessness for these families? Or in other words, what is the amount per month that a family could donate essentially? And would this be through Mary's Place?
Hi, great question. I'm going to answer that probably from a bigger level. On one of the slides I had shown, I would say yes. Let me start by saying that we would definitely love to partner with anyone willing to support our families to stay in their hard-won homes, right? To reduce the trauma and experience of homelessness and poverty. I think the second part is we've experienced an average rental assistance amount per household of $11,500. And so we know that that's what it's taken so far, but it varies for every family. And so it's on a case-by-case basis, and we treat those very individually. So would love to partner with anyone willing to help us keep families in their homes, right? And so if that's something you'd like to do, please, Mary's Place is willing and ready to partner.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think so far just have one more question, so please feel free to keep entering anything into the Q&A if anything comes up. But right now, last question so far is I'd like to hear more about your new facility in Bellevue. So if we do have a minute or two, maybe Marty, you could share a little bit more about our Bellevue shelter.
We'd love to share about our newest shelter, our newest home for now in Bellevue. It's the first time we've been able to really serve families on the east side in their home community, and we're grateful for that. It's right now 90 rooms, over 200 family members. It's a very lively shelter. I will say we signed a lease on December 16th and opened on December 25th. So it was rush, but it was important. If you remember what was happening then, it was extreme weather, cold temperatures, freezing temperatures. It was a COVID surge, and we knew we had to get this open. We weren't perfectly ready, but it was the right thing to do. And so we now have continued to scale up, invite more families inside, which has been critical as this eviction moratorium has been lifting. But we have a robust kids program there at Youth Services. Marta could share more about. Our health services program is working there. We're really finding that the facility itself, it's a former hotel, and it's been an amazing gift of being able to restore dignity, to reduce trauma in shelter, families having their own rooms, their own bathrooms, their own space to call home for now, and all while working on their housing goals. So we're happy to answer more questions. You can reach back out to Katrina if you would like to get more information about that. You can donate some of the much needed items over there. There's ways to volunteer and support and serve meals and things like that. So we would love for you to do that as well. So thanks for asking.
Looks like we have no other questions have come through.
Well, awesome and amazing. I just want to say thank you to our incredible panelists for your wisdom and insight, and for all that you do every day, every night, and for joining us here today. We hope you all enjoyed this discussion. Rest assured, you'll be getting these slides and the contact information so you can connect with McKinney-Vento. You can also connect with Child Care Resources. really in this effort to address family homelessness and end the cycle and reduce youth trauma. So there's so many ways you can support, and we want to help make sure that you have those connections. I will share that Mary's Place is really launching our Dream Big campaign on April 1st to meet a generous $1 million match from Amazon. And the campaign will end on May 12th with a lunchtime celebration and a call to action where you can really get inspired, where you can grab a lunch and get engaged and reconnect with folks, see others that volunteer at Mary's Place. And really it's our desire to create awareness and advocacy with activities that you will learn at that event. And Katrina will send more information about how you can support the campaign, register for the event, and that will be a great day of fun over at the Seattle Center. So we're going to make sure that you can get connected to all of our partners here, and we'll be doing more lunch and learn events where we'll share about other aspects of the work we do, really together with our partners, because we do not do this work alone or in silos. It is so important to build these community partnerships, and that's the only way we'll be able to address and prevent family homelessness. And so we hope to see you at those future lunch and learns. And just to mention, you're going to see a little survey pop up in your browser right after you exit this lunch and learn. So I really hope you'll take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about the discussion, and really how can we make these sessions more useful to you, because that's what we want to do. So please share ideas of other topics that you'd like to learn about as well. And I just want to say thank you, and have a great afternoon. And we appreciate you joining us today. Take care, everyone. Thanks again, panelists. You're awesome and amazing.